Hello, Mr. Narrator. My name is David Morgan, but that's not my real name. I'm 38 years old, and I've chosen to share my story under a pseudonym for reasons you'll soon understand. I was gay. In fact, a gay millionaire and LGBTQ activist, until I met Jesus early this year. I've been following your channel for a while now, and I have to say the conversion stories have deeply intrigued me. I've also been praying for each of the people who shared their journeys. But I couldn't help noticing that most of the stories feature people converting from Islam, except for the Japanese woman's testimony. So I thought it might be time for a change, and I decided to send you my own story. I was born and raised in a small Midwestern town in the United States, the middle child of 3 siblings. My father was a hardworking man, but he carried a sharp temper that often exploded in anger, and my mother, though present, was emotionally distant. Their constant arguments filled our home with tension. Sometimes I would lie in bed at night with my pillow over my ears, trying to block out the sound of slammed doors and raised voices. When they finally divorced, I was only 12, and though I didn't fully understand what had gone wrong, I blamed myself in a childlike way. I remember thinking maybe if I had been better, quieter, smarter, they would have stayed together. That thought stayed with me for years, a quiet, gnawing ache deep in my heart. After the divorce, my mother got custody, and we moved into a small apartment. She worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, which meant she was rarely home. Left to my own devices, I discovered the internet at a very young age, around 10 or 11. It started innocently, watching cartoons and playing games, but soon curiosity led me elsewhere. One click here, a pop-up there, and I stumbled upon pornography. I didn't know what I was looking at, but something inside me stirred. At first, I felt ashamed and closed the browser, but the images stuck in my mind. Over time, I returned to it, each visit pushing boundaries a little further. I found myself drawn more to images of men than women, though I didn't fully understand why. At school, I started noticing boys in a way that felt different, but I was too scared to tell anyone. In our town, people whispered about those kinds of people with disdain, and the church we occasionally attended called homosexuality a sin. By the time I reached my early teens, I felt completely trapped inside my own skin. I had no one to talk to about the confusion I felt. My older brother had moved in with our dad, and my younger sister was too little to understand. At school, I kept up the appearance of being a normal kid, laughing at jokes and pretending to have crushes on girls like everyone else. But inside, I was wrestling with an intense guilt that I couldn't shake. I would pray at night for God to take away these feelings, but when they didn't disappear, I began to believe He didn't care about me, or worse, that He hated me. My isolation deepened as I withdrew into myself. Pornography became my escape, my secret place where I didn't have to perform or pretend. But every time I closed my laptop, I felt hollow, dirty, and even more lost. I longed for someone, anyone, to see me and say, "You're okay. You're enough." But in my world, that never happened. Teachers were too busy and my mom was too tired. I joined a few after-school clubs hoping to feel part of something, but I never quite fit in. I remember sitting in the cafeteria one afternoon, watching groups of kids laughing and joking, and feeling like I was on the other side of an invisible glass wall. No one knew how much I ached to be included, to belong. That deep yearning became a seed that would later grow into something much bigger. At the time, I didn't realize how powerful the need for acceptance could be, how it could shape every decision, every relationship, every future step. All I knew was that I didn't want to feel alone anymore, and I would do almost anything to make the loneliness stop. By the time I entered college at 18, I was desperate for a fresh start. I had spent years hiding my true feelings behind a mask, but the moment I stepped onto that campus, I felt a strange sense of freedom. No one knew my past. No one saw me as the quiet, awkward boy from a broken home. Here I could reinvent myself. It wasn't long before I discovered online spaces where people like me gathered. Late at night in my dorm room, I scrolled through forums and chat rooms for LGBTQ people. For the first time in my life, I saw men and women talking openly about their sexuality without fear or shame. They spoke of pride, acceptance, and living their truth. I devoured every post, every comment. It felt like I had stumbled into a family I never knew existed, a family that promised unconditional acceptance. Social media quickly became my stage. I created anonymous accounts at first, liking posts and sharing memes that spoke to my inner world. But as my confidence grew, so did my boldness. I started sharing my own thoughts, telling pieces of my story in carefully worded posts. To my surprise, people responded with encouragement and solidarity. Strangers from around the country would comment, "Thank you for speaking out. I feel the same way." Every comment felt like a drop of water on a soul parched from years of loneliness. Soon I dropped the anonymity. I started posting under my real name, standing taller with each status update. By my sophomore year, I was organizing small meetups for LGBTQ students on campus. We met in coffee shops and library study rooms, sharing our struggles and victories, laughing about things only we understood. Those meetings became my sanctuary, the place where I finally felt seen. I threw myself into activism with the zeal of someone who had been silent too long. I joined the campus LGBTQ Alliance and quickly rose to a leadership role. I started hosting events, movie nights, discussion panels, even small rallies on campus grounds. I remember standing in front of a crowd for the first time, microphone in hand, my heart pounding like a drum. "We deserve to be here. We deserve to be loved," I said, and the applause that followed was like a tidal wave crashing over me. For once, I wasn't hiding. I was celebrated. The more I spoke, the more people listened. Faculty members began inviting me to share my perspective in classrooms. Local organizations reached out for partnerships. I was becoming a voice not just for myself but for others who still lived in the shadows. And I loved it. By the time I graduated, my small campus group had grown beyond what I imagined. We weren't just meeting in quiet rooms anymore. We were holding public events, drawing hundreds from the surrounding community. It was then that I decided to take a bold step. I founded my first LGBTQ+ support center in a rented storefront near the campus. At first, it was just a few volunteers and me, offering peer counseling and resource guides. But word spread quickly. People came in seeking support, some in tears, others just needing a safe place to sit. We partnered with local businesses for donations and held our first fundraising gala within 6 months. That night, as I stood in a borrowed tuxedo under fairy lights, I realized this wasn't just a small group anymore. This was a movement. The success of that first center lit a fire in me to expand. Over the next few years, I opened 4 more LGBTQ+ centers in different states across the US. Each one became a beacon for those who felt alone, afraid, or rejected. Our services grew too. We offered counseling, job assistance, housing referrals, HIV testing, and educational workshops. We hosted pride events, youth programs, and support groups for parents struggling to understand their children's sexuality. People from all walks of life walked through our doors: college students, young professionals, even older adults who had kept their secret for decades. To keep everything running, we relied heavily on donations and fundraising events. Individuals gave generously, often moved by stories we shared on social media. We organized annual galas, silent auctions, charity runs, and online campaigns that brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars. Grants from foundations and organizations that supported LGBTQ+ initiatives became a lifeline for us. I learned quickly how to write proposals, highlighting how our programs saved lives and built stronger communities. Corporations began taking notice too. A few large companies, anonymous for their own protection now, became sponsors, their logos appearing on our banners and flyers. Some offered matching gift programs for their employees. Planned giving also became part of our strategy. I remember meeting with elderly donors who pledged to include us in their wills, saying they wanted to leave a legacy of love. By now, our centers had grown into fully staffed organizations with therapists, social workers, and volunteers. Behind the scenes, I was traveling constantly, attending conferences, meeting with potential donors, appearing on panels about LGBTQ+ rights. I even made connections with a major European tech organization, one of the biggest supporters of LGBTQ+ causes worldwide. Their partnership opened doors I never thought possible. We began supplying certain services and products for them in the US, and as the contracts rolled in, my personal wealth skyrocketed. By my early 30s, I was a millionaire. I bought a sleek condo in an urban high-rise, drove luxury cars, and took vacations in Bali and Paris. But more than the wealth, it was the influence I relished. My name became synonymous with progress and pride in certain circles. Success became like a drug to me. After opening 5 LGBTQ+ centers across America, I couldn't stop dreaming bigger. Each center I launched seemed to spark another wave of attention. My phone never stopped buzzing with messages from people thanking me for changing their lives or asking how they could bring a center to their own city. Requests started pouring in from community leaders and activists in other states, hoping I'd expand into their regions too. By my mid-30s, we had laid the groundwork for partnerships across the Midwest, Northeast, and even parts of the West Coast. Our annual reports showed numbers that made donors proud. Thousands counseled, hundreds connected to housing and medical care, countless youth finding a safe place to figure out their identities. What started as a small group on my college campus had turned into a nationwide network of influence. I felt like I was building a legacy. As our impact grew, so did our circle of supporters. Wealthy donors began showing up at our fundraising galas, people whose names I had once only seen in magazines. Some were entrepreneurs, others actors or musicians, and a few were heirs to family fortunes. They would thank me personally for giving back to the community, and then hand over 6-figure checks like it was pocket change. I got used to seeing designer suits and gowns at our events, hearing people talk about their summer homes and private jets. Every handshake seemed to lead to another opportunity. Some of the biggest celebrities in the world began mentioning our centers in their interviews, though I'll leave their names unsaid. The attention we received from media outlets was overwhelming. Articles praising our work appeared in national magazines and even international news sites. My face was featured on glossy covers with headlines like, "The Man Leading America's LGBTQ Revolution." The turning point in my personal wealth came when I secured a partnership with a major European tech organization. They were known globally for their innovation and were also one of the largest donors to LGBTQ+ causes. I'll never forget the day their executive team flew into New York to meet me. We sat in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the city skyline, and they spoke about their vision for expanding their operations in the U.S. They wanted a trusted partner to supply and manage certain services on their behalf. Somehow, I convinced them I was that partner. The deal that followed changed my life forever. I went from being the founder of nonprofit centers to becoming a key supplier for one of the largest tech companies in the world. My role brought in contracts worth millions annually, and my personal income exploded overnight. With the new wealth came a lifestyle I never imagined growing up in that small, broken home. I moved into a penthouse apartment in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods of San Francisco. Floor-to-ceiling windows gave me a view of the bay, and I often stood there in the evenings with a glass of wine, feeling like I had conquered the world. My car collection grew, a sleek electric sports car, a luxury SUV, and a vintage convertible that turned heads wherever I drove. I began traveling internationally, not just for work but for pleasure. Paris, Dubai, Tokyo, and Cape Town became playgrounds where I networked with other elite donors and activists. My Instagram feed was a collage of luxury, private parties, 5-star resorts, designer clothes, and plates of food too pretty to eat. People began calling me a role model for modern LGBTQ success. LGBTQ supportive media outlets continued to highlight my achievements, calling me a pioneer and a beacon of hope. I was invited to speak at international conferences, where I'd walk on stage to standing ovations. I gave TED-style talks about inclusion and empowerment, with audiences hanging on my every word. Universities offered me honorary degrees, and I even received invitations to meet political figures who praised the work we were doing for marginalized communities. Every award, every article, every social media share added to the persona I had built. I was no longer just a boy trying to fit in. I was a symbol of progress, an icon of pride. People told me I was living proof that you can have it all, and I believed them. January 20th, 2025, as expected, was a day that sent shockwaves through the LGBTQ+ community. Donald Trump had just been inaugurated as the 47th President of the United States. The news channels played his speech on repeat, and social media erupted with debates, protests, and warnings about what his administration might mean for marginalized groups. In our circles, the mood was tense and electric. Emails from activists poured in with subject lines like, "Emergency Strategy Meeting," and "We Can't Be Silent." My phone vibrated nonstop with texts from colleagues and allies, all of them worried about the possible rollback of protections for LGBTQ+ people. As a leader with 5 thriving LGBTQ+ centers under my name, I felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. I spent hours on Zoom calls and strategy sessions, trying to reassure people that we would fight back against any policies that threatened our progress. Within days of the inauguration, our national network scheduled a major LGBTQ+ conference in Washington, D.C. to coordinate our response. Activists, lawyers, and leaders from across the country were expected to attend. The goal was clear: to create a united front against potential legislative changes and to strengthen our community's resilience. I was slated to give one of the keynote speeches. My assistants worked overtime preparing slides, notes, and talking points. I rehearsed my address late into the night in my penthouse living room, the city lights flickering like distant stars. I planned to speak about unity, courage, and the power of our movement to withstand any political storm. As I practiced, I felt a surge of pride knowing I would be standing before thousands, not as the scared boy I once was, but as a leader others looked up to. The morning of the conference, I left my apartment early to catch my flight. Security had been heightened in D.C. since the inauguration, and we wanted to arrive ahead of schedule. I remember tossing my suitcase into the back seat of my black SUV, my driver greeting me with a cheerful, "Good morning, Mr. Morgan." The roads were slick from a light overnight rain, and the sky was overcast, the kind of gray that felt heavy and oppressive. As we merged onto the interstate, I scrolled through my phone, replying to emails and checking social media updates from colleagues already on the ground at the conference venue. There was talk of protests outside the hotel, and I began mentally rewriting parts of my speech to address the growing anxiety in our community. My driver turned on the radio, and I barely noticed as political commentators debated the first executive orders of the new administration. We were about 2 hours into the drive when it happened. It was sudden, violent, and utterly disorienting. One moment I was reading an article about policy changes, and the next there was a deafening screech of tires, a blinding flash of headlights, and the sickening crunch of metal on metal. A semi-truck had jackknifed across the wet road ahead of us, leaving no room to swerve. The impact threw me forward, my body weightless for an instant before everything went black. I felt the violent jolt of the SUV spinning out of control, glass shattering around me, and then an unnatural stillness. I couldn't move. I couldn't even feel my body. A strange calm settled over me as muffled voices and sirens faded into the background like a distant echo. Suddenly, I was no longer in the car. I was floating above it, looking down at the wreckage. The SUV was crumpled like a discarded soda can, smoke curling from the hood. I could see my own body slumped in the back seat, blood running from a gash on my forehead. My driver lay motionless against the steering wheel, airbag deflated. Paramedics rushed toward us, shouting commands I couldn't make out. I should have felt panic, but there was none. Instead, I felt detached, as though I was watching someone else's tragedy unfold. I hovered there, weightless, the scene below blurred at the edges. Time seemed to stretch and collapse all at once. Seconds felt like hours, and yet everything was happening at lightning speed. As I drifted higher, I became aware of a pull, not physical but something deeper, like gravity working in reverse. The sounds of the world faded completely until there was only silence, thick and consuming. Darkness surrounded me at first, but it wasn't the absence of light. It felt alive, like a veil waiting to be lifted. Then, in an instant, colors I had never seen before burst into view, swirling like liquid stained glass. The air, or what felt like air, was charged with energy, and I sensed an overwhelming presence approaching. My thoughts weren't spoken aloud, yet they echoed like they were carried on the wind. Where am I? What is happening to me? The presence grew stronger, warm yet powerful, drawing me toward it. I realized with startling clarity that I was no longer bound to my earthly body. I could see myself not just as I appeared in the car, but as I truly was, naked, not physically but spiritually. Every choice, Every thought, every secret of my life felt exposed under an invisible light. I wanted to look away to hide, but there was no place to run. Memories began flashing before me, not in chronological order but all at once, like a million photographs layered together. I saw myself as a little boy crying into a pillow, as a teenager huddled over a laptop late at night, as a young man giving fiery speeches at LGBTQ+ rallies. I felt the joy, the pain, the pride, and the shame of every moment all at once. Then I saw him. Not in the way you see a person on earth, but in a way that went beyond sight. He was light and fire, love and authority all at once. It was Jesus. I knew it without anyone telling me. His presence was both terrifying and comforting, like standing in the eye of a storm. I couldn't speak, but my soul screamed questions. Why am I here? What is happening? Without words, he answered. His voice wasn't sound but a vibration that filled every part of me. David, you are here because I want to show you the truth about me, about eternity, and about the path you have walked. I felt an invisible hand lifting me higher, and the earth below shrank into nothingness. Ahead, I saw what looked like a vast expanse of light and shadow divided sharply, and I knew instinctively I was being taken into a realm far beyond the physical world I had known. The journey was just beginning, and I could feel it. Something was about to be revealed that would change everything I believed. I was rising, though not with my body. It felt like my soul was being pulled through layers of reality, higher and higher, away from the broken SUV and the wet highway where paramedics were working on my motionless form. The earth grew small, and so did my worries about emails, meetings, and speeches. None of it mattered here. The colors around me deepened. Shades I had no names for, living hues that seemed to breathe and move like they were alive. Time no longer made sense. There was no past or future, only this endless present, like I was suspended in a sea of light and sound that spoke to me without words. Then the light began to sharpen into a form, and my soul trembled. Even before I could see clearly, I knew it was him, Jesus. His presence hit me like a tidal wave of love and truth so pure it burned. He was clothed in light, brighter than the sun, yet I could look at him without being blinded. His eyes pierced through me, not in anger but with a sorrowful tenderness I couldn't bear. I felt everything at once. My pride, my achievements, my sins, my secret regrets. They were all laid bare like pages in an open book. I wanted to hide, but there was nowhere to run. Without speaking, he showed me my life in flashes. I saw myself as a boy, craving affection in a home filled with shouting and silence. I saw the night I stumbled onto pornography for the first time, the seed planted that would later grow into chains I couldn't break. I saw my college years, the first time I told the world I was gay, the applause, the validation. I saw the centers I built, the interviews I gave, the stages I stood on. For a moment, I felt pride, but it melted instantly into shame when I saw what came next. Jesus let me see beyond the applause and headlines. He showed me the unseen ripples of my life, how my words and influence had led others away from him. I saw young people following my example, embracing identities and lifestyles that pulled them farther from God's design. I saw parents grieving in prayer for their children who were caught in cycles of addiction and confusion. I saw souls slipping quietly into spiritual darkness, their hands outstretched, reaching for something real but finding only more emptiness. Each one carried a faint echo of my voice cheering them on in their truth. The weight of it crushed me. Lord, I didn't know, I whispered, though no sound came from my lips. He answered with a thought that filled my being, but you could have known. My word was near you all along. Then he turned my eyes toward a place so dark and heavy I felt my spirit recoil. It was a chasm vast and endless, filled with shadows that writhed and screamed. I understood instantly, it was hell. But it wasn't the cartoonish flames I had imagined as a child. This was worse. Souls were chained in cages of light, twisted into tormenting shapes. I saw people I had known, former acquaintances from the LGBTQ+ movement, activists who had stood beside me at rallies, faces I had seen in nightclubs and parades. Their spiritual forms were twisted, their eyes wide with regret and horror as they relived memories of rejecting God's call. The pain they felt wasn't from fire, it came from within, a gnawing anguish of separation from the one they now longed for. "We thought we were free," one cried out, her voice breaking like glass. "Why didn't anyone tell us?" Their screams rose like a chorus of sorrow, echoing across the abyss. Jesus stood beside me, his face full of grief. "They are not here because I wanted it," he said without moving his lips. "They are here because they chose to turn away from me. I reached for them. I spoke to them. But they hardened their hearts." His voice wasn't angry. It was the voice of a father mourning his lost children. I couldn't stop my tears. The scene cut deep because I knew I had encouraged that same rebellion. I had celebrated pride, waved the rainbow flag, and built platforms that normalized sin. My influence had helped light paths that ended in this darkness. I wanted to fall on my face and beg for forgiveness, but there was no ground beneath me, only the weight of my guilt pressing down like 1,000 stones. Suddenly, the darkness lifted, and I was swept upward into a place so glorious my words will never do it justice. It was heaven, or at least the threshold of it. The light there wasn't just light. It was alive, warm, and overflowing with love so powerful I thought it might shatter me. The air carried music, not from instruments but from the very fabric of the place. I saw people walking freely, men and women clothed in radiant robes, faces shining with peace and joy. Their laughter was like water flowing over stones, pure and unforced. They were whole, complete in ways I had never seen on earth. Flowers bloomed in colors richer than emeralds and rubies, and rivers of crystal flowed through gardens where trees bore fruits that seemed to hum with life. Jesus turned to me. "This is what I made you for. Not the brokenness of this world, not the false freedoms that enslave. I created you to know me, to walk in my truth, and to reflect my love." His words weren't just spoken, they sank into the deepest parts of my soul. Then he showed me something even more beautiful. People I recognized who had once lived lives like mine but had turned to him before it was too late. Their faces shone with a joy I couldn't comprehend. One man came forward and said, "I was like you, but he rescued me, and now I am home." But the vision shifted again. Jesus showed me two futures, one if I chose to return to my old life and one if I followed him. In the first, I saw myself back in my penthouse, back on stage, continuing to lead others astray. My wealth grew, but so did the darkness inside me. I aged alone, surrounded by luxury but consumed by despair. Then came my death, and the same abyss I had seen moments before swallowed me whole. In the second vision, I saw myself standing in small churches, sharing my story. I saw people weeping, chains breaking, lives transformed as they turned to Jesus. I saw a light spreading across cities where I had once planted seeds of confusion, now replaced with seeds of truth. "The choice is yours," Jesus said, his eyes burning with both love and authority. "But know this, many are waiting for your obedience. Their eternity depends on it." I wanted to stay. The peace here was unlike anything I had ever known. But then I felt a tug pulling me downward. I cried out silently, "Lord, please don't send me back. I want to be here with you." But he placed a hand over my heart and I felt a warmth so intense it made me weep. "David," he said, "I am with you even there. Go and tell them what you have seen. Warn them. Love them. Lead them back to me." His words echoed as the light faded and the music dimmed. In an instant, I was back in my body. Pain shot through me as paramedics shouted over the blaring sirens. My eyes fluttered open, and I saw the pale ceiling of an ambulance. A mask covered my face, and the sharp smell of antiseptic filled my nostrils. "He's back," someone yelled. My chest heaved as if I had been underwater for hours. Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't from the pain of my injuries. They were from the overwhelming truth of what I had just experienced. When I opened my eyes in the hospital, the world felt different. The sounds of beeping machines and hushed nurses filled the room, but my mind was still echoing with the words of Jesus. "Go and tell them what you have seen. Warn them. Love them. Lead them back to me." I had no idea how to begin, but I knew I couldn't go back to my old life. I couldn't return to the LGBTQ+ empire I had built over a decade, the one that had made me a millionaire and an icon. As I lay there, bruised and bandaged, I drafted a message in my mind. I didn't care about the fallout. I just knew obedience mattered more than comfort now. By the time I was discharged, my decision was clear. I would shut down all 5 of my LGBTQ+ centers and renounce everything I once stood for. The first call I made was to my senior team. They were surprised to hear from me so soon after the accident, but their surprise turned to shock as I spoke. "We're closing everything," I said flatly. "The centers, the partnerships, the contracts, all of it." There was silence on the other end, then an explosion of voices. "David, are you serious? You've built this from the ground up. We've got clients depending on us. Think about the backlash. This isn't just your name, it's the whole movement." I took a deep breath. I've seen something that changed everything. I can't keep leading people down a path I know ends in destruction. That day, I sent out an official statement on our website and social media. It read, "I am no longer the person I once was. I have encountered the truth of Jesus Christ and can no longer support any work or ideology that opposes his design. Effective immediately, all centers under my leadership will cease operations." The reaction was instant and brutal. Within hours, my phone was flooded with calls and texts, some pleading, others cursing. The private forums and group chats I had helped create for LGBTQ+ leaders and activists were on fire with anger and confusion. Posts in the community's closed networks accused me of betrayal. "David has lost his mind," one read. "He's turned his back on everything we built together," said another. Former friends sent me long messages, some demanding explanations, others unloading their rage. A few accused me of being brainwashed, saying I must have been manipulated while vulnerable after the accident. Anonymous accounts in our internal chat rooms even threatened me, warning, "Stay quiet or pay the price." What had once been safe spaces of affirmation now felt like battlegrounds, every word a reminder that I was no longer welcome among them. Corporate sponsors reacted swiftly. The European tech giant that had made me their US supplier pulled out of all agreements. Their statement was cold and precise. "We are deeply disappointed by Mr. Morgan's statements, which are not aligned with our company's values. Effective immediately, we are terminating all partnerships and contracts." Other donors followed suit. The once friendly corporations that had lined up to fund our events now issued press releases distancing themselves from me. Foundations revoked grants, and planned giving agreements were withdrawn. Overnight, my bank account began to drain. Employees resigned en masse, some leaving angry notes on my desk. Lawsuits were threatened by former partners citing breach of contract. It felt like the ground had been ripped from under my feet. 1 month after the accident, I sat alone in my penthouse. Boxes stacked high, notices from creditors piling on the table. The luxury cars were repossessed. The condo was up for sale to pay off debts. From millionaire to nearly bankrupt, I watched everything I once held tightly slip through my fingers. There were nights I stared out at the city skyline, wondering how I'd gotten here. The applause that had once fueled me was gone, replaced with silence and scorn. Fear crept in like a cold fog. What if I'd made a mistake? What if this wasn't God at all? What if I had thrown away my life for nothing? But in those moments of doubt, I would remember his eyes, Jesus' eyes burning with love and sorrow. I remembered his words, "Go and tell them. Lead them back to me." So I began to speak. I posted videos online sharing my testimony. I told my followers about the accident, the out-of-body experience, the vision of heaven and hell, and the call to repentance. I spoke at small churches and community groups, often to skeptical audiences. Sometimes people walked out mid-speech. Other times they stayed and wept. Pastors would take my hand afterward and whisper, "We've been praying for someone like you to speak the truth." Each time I shared, I felt the hollow ache inside me begin to fill, not with fame or wealth but with peace. Still, the attacks didn't stop. Protesters showed up at churches where I was scheduled to speak, holding signs that read, "Love is love," and "Don't spread hate." At one event, someone threw a drink at me as I left the building. Friends I'd known for years refused to return my calls. My inbox was filled with messages calling me a traitor, a bigot, a hypocrite. I didn't fight back. I didn't argue. Instead, I prayed. Alone in my now modest apartment, I fell to my knees night after night, asking God for strength. There were days when fear gripped me so tightly I could barely breathe. I worried about paying rent, about how I would rebuild my life from the ashes. But each time, a quiet peace settled over me, reminding me I wasn't alone. The God who met me in the accident was still with me, guiding each step. Slowly, new friendships began to form. People who didn't care about my past but stood beside me in prayer and encouragement. I realized the empire I had lost was never truly mine to begin with. The only kingdom worth building was His. So I kept going, speaking, writing, and sharing my story wherever doors opened. And though the crowds were smaller now, I saw something I never saw at my galas. Hearts changing, people weeping at altars, lives turning back to God. I had traded wealth for purpose, applause for obedience, and I had no regrets. It has been 6 months since the accident that tore my life in half and rebuilt it in a way I never expected. 6 months since I hovered between life and death, saw eternity open before me, and heard the voice of Jesus call me out of the darkness I had so proudly embraced. Now, I live in Rhode Island, far from the bright lights and noise of my old life, quietly laying new foundations. I spend my mornings at a small wooden desk in a borrowed room above a humble church office where I help with ministry work and prepare sermons. The penthouses and luxury cars are gone. Instead, I'm starting a new tech firm from scratch, praying over each step and believing Jesus will water this work in His time. The emails from wealthy donors have been replaced with messages from strangers, some thanking me for my testimony, others angrily demanding I stop spreading hate. Yet for the first time in my life, I feel whole. I feel free. I traded the world's applause for the peace of knowing I'm walking in God's will. These days, my platform looks nothing like the stages I once graced. I don't fly first class to glamorous galas or stand before crowds in ballrooms lit by crystal chandeliers. Instead, I preach in modest churches, sometimes to groups of 20 or 30, other times to half-empty halls where people sit with folded arms, unsure whether to believe me. I don't blame them. I know how far gone I was, how fiercely I once mocked Christians who spoke of repentance and holiness. And yet, each time I stand behind a pulpit or post another testimony online, I sense God's presence surrounding me like a shield. I remind myself that even if only one person hears and turns, it's worth every sacrifice. Rebuilding my faith hasn't been easy. The first weeks after leaving the hospital felt like wandering through unknown territory. I no longer had my wealth or influence to lean on. The friends I had surrounded myself with vanished the moment I spoke the name of Jesus. Even my own voice trembled when I prayed out loud for the first time. I spent long nights reading the Gospels, often with tears running down my face. Words I once dismissed as outdated now felt alive, cutting into my pride and soothing the deep wounds in my heart. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? I read that verse in Mark 8 verse 36 one night, and it struck me like a thunderclap. That was my life in a single sentence. I still remember the faces Jesus showed me during my near-death experience, the countless souls lost in a darkness of their own making. Their cries echo in my memory, their regret burns in my chest. It's why I keep speaking even when my voice shakes. I've made it my mission to warn others, especially those in the LGBTQ+ community and their families. I know what it feels like to believe you're finally free, only to find the emptiness creeping in at night when the parties are over and the applause fades. I know what it's like to build an identity on a lie so convincing that even love becomes twisted. I don't say this from hate. I say it because I was there. I believed it all, and it almost cost me my eternity. The backlash hasn't stopped. Inside the private forums where I was once celebrated, my name is now spoken with bitterness and disbelief. Former colleagues accuse me in long posts of abandoning the community and turning on the very people who gave him a platform. Messages still flood my inbox, some anonymous, others from people I once called friends. The tone ranges from sadness to rage. You're brainwashed. You'll regret this. One message even warned, you're destroying lives and it won't end well for you. Fear tries to creep in, whispering that I should go back, that I should apologize and reclaim my old life. But then I remember what I saw, the flames, the sorrow, the unending separation from God. No threat on earth can compare to that reality. I won't lie and say this new life is easy. There are nights when the weight of loss presses so hard on my chest I can barely breathe. I've gone from a man who commanded rooms to one who walks quietly into churches, praying they'll let me speak. I've gone from luxury vacations to counting every dollar just to keep the lights on. But in those quiet moments, I feel a joy that no amount of wealth ever gave me. I feel the presence of God wrapping around me, reminding me that I am not alone. Every time I see a life transformed, a young man weeping at the altar, a mother thanking me for helping her daughter find faith, it feels like heaven itself is smiling. I often reflect on why God chose me. Why did he pull me out of that wreckage, out of a life so tangled in pride and sin? I don't know, but I know I can't stay silent. There's too much at stake. To those still in the LGBTQ+ lifestyle, I plead with you, not in anger, not in condemnation, but in love. I know how strong the pull is. I know the voice is telling you, this is who you are, sounds so convincing. But I'm here to tell you there's another voice, a gentle, patient voice, that is calling you home. Jesus isn't your enemy. He's your creator, the one who knows every wound, every tear, every longing you've ever felt. He loves you enough to call you out of darkness just like he did for me. To parents watching their children walk this path, don't give up. Pray. Love them deeply, but don't compromise the truth. The prayers of my mother, long ignored and ridiculed by me, were part of the reason I was able to hear God's voice when I did. Her persistence in the secret place, her tears before the Lord, they weren't wasted. So keep sowing those seeds of prayer. I stand here now, a man who lost everything I thought I wanted but gained something far greater. I have no titles, no millions in the bank, no awards on my wall. But I have peace with God. I have the joy of knowing that when my time on earth truly ends, I won't be facing an abyss of regret. I'll be stepping into the arms of the one who loved me all along. So to anyone listening, whether you're caught in sin, weighed down by shame, or just searching for truth, turn to him. You don't have to wait until a car accident or a hospital bed. Call on Jesus now. Surrender everything and let him give you real freedom. I lost the world, but I found life.